In Azure, there are a handful of ways that you can deploy container apps, and it can be confusing to decide which one you should use. So naturally, they created a new Azure Container App service that allows us to do more of a serverless type of deployment with our containers. Let's mash on that.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Asp.Net Monsters. In today's episode, we make a reference to that XKCD comic in which there are 17 standards, and we decided to build an 18th standard to cover them all and replace them, and now we have 18 standards. So there's another way of running containers on Azure. There's only like 4 or 5 different ways of doing it now.
Yeah. So at first I was a little sarcastic about this when I saw the release of the new service called Azure Container Apps. But having dug into it a little more, I think there's a really compelling use case there in that this is more of a serverless type of offering where we can take our container apps, throw them out there, not have to worry too much about the orchestration of how those containers work, but still get all the benefits of a serverless offering where we don't have to pay for anything if it's not being used, and it can still scale up and handle as much load as we think we might need to throw at it. So what we're going to do today is explore a few things. So we're going to use .NET 6 and the new minimal API template. So the idea there is that those are ideal for creating like a microservice, which is something that you might package up as a container and deploy into some sort of container hosting service. And we're going to try to do that using Azure Container Apps and just kind of see how this all works and how it pieces together.
Awesome. I'm excited.
All right, so I have an empty folder here, and I'm just going to do a .NET new web API with the minimal option here so that we get the new minimal API template.
And this is, of course, .NET 6.
Yes, so this is .NET 6.
Because that is live and available.
It is.
As of like 2 days ago, at the time of recording.
All right, so let's take a look at this here. Super simple. There's just the program.cs here with that configures our web app builder, has some swagger stuff that gets put in there. One thing I'm going to do is actually remove this part of the configuration where it says to use HTTPS redirection. With Azure Container Apps, the container app environment itself is going to do that TLS termination for us. So, and then from there, just communicate with the container internally over port 80. So we don't necessarily need to do the HTTPS work within the container. We can if we want to, but I'm going to set that up so that we don't initially. And then we just have this map get saying that the weather forecast endpoint returns some random weather forecast data. And I'm just going to add another simple route here, just a default route so that it's a little bit easier to see what's going on within my app, and I don't get a 404 when I go to the default route. And I'm just going to say a return hello from container app. We'll do environment.os version. So we see something interesting there. So that's the app that we're going to deploy.
So, like typically, if I'm building out something that's going to be in a container, it's going to go up to Kubernetes, and as ASP.NET, I would look to add health checks to it. Is that something I still need to consider for this?
Yes, you probably should. It's not something I have played around with yet, though, in the context of this service. But we'll maybe look at that in a future episode.
That's good. All right, then we have another topic for our future episode list.
So I'm going to do .NET run here and just run this from locally on my host OS. And if I go to that endpoint, I can see hello from container app, and it says I'm running Microsoft Windows, apparently NT version 10. But that's not what we want to do. We actually want to package this up and run it in a container. So to do that, we'll create a Docker file. and we'll try running it from there. So I'm going to close that and create a new Docker file here. Docker file. And this Docker file, I'm just going to copy the logic here. So it's going to be from the ASP.NET 6.0 container image that Microsoft publishes. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the published version of this, which I will publish from the command line shortly. So that would be in that folder, and I'm going to copy it over to a folder called app, and then set that as my working directory, and set up an entry point here where I entry point run.net and pass the parameter of whatever my DLL is, which should be monster weather.dll. I got type that in correctly. Monster weather.dll looks good to me. So now what I need to do is just publish that so that there's a published version of it sitting in the release folder. So .NET publish -c release to do that. So now I should have in here release, publish. There's all of the code that I want that will be deployed into my Docker container, the compiled application. Easy enough. Okay, next we need to do some command line things to actually create that container image. And then we're going to look at pushing it to something called Azure Container Registry, so the container registry service within Azure. So first thing I'm going to do is build up this image. So I'm going to say, zoom in even a little bit more here, docker build -t. And I need a name for this thing, so I'm going to call it my monster weather image and point it at this folder here, my monster weather folder, which has my Docker file in it. That should build up my Docker container image for me. That was nice and quick. And now I'm going to run this container locally here just to know that I have it configured right before I push it up to the container registry. So to do that, it would be, I'm going to do a Docker run. That's not what I wanted to paste. Okay, no pasting for me. Docker run p. I'm gonna do port 8082 and send that over to port 80 within the container. That was an interactive terminal, and I'm gonna remove it after it's done. And what did I call this thing? It was monster weather image.
Yeah, that's right.
So that should run it. We get some console outputs, so that's good. Now if I go on my machine here to port 8082, it's just HTTP. There we go.
All right.
So hello for my container app, and now I'm running in Unix. Good stuff. So presumably that's coming from my container. We can.
How I feel about Linux identifying itself as Unix, but
yeah. Well, what's the base for that image? I wonder.
Oh, it's probably something like Alpine, but Linux is not Unix.
It's a little strange. That is a little strange. I agree. But it's running and not in Windows, so good enough for me for the purposes of what we're trying to do. All right, so next up is we're going to head over to the Azure portal now. And I already have a container registry service set up here. So if I head over to my container apps is the name of my container registry. Whoa, scrolly. Within here, the only thing, so this was, I just created it with the defaults, nothing fancy here. The only thing that you have to be sure of is to come in here to access keys and enable the admin user. And now you know my passwords, and that's fine because this is just being recorded and I'm going to tear this all down at the end of the video.
Probably. He'll probably remember. But you should test anyway to make sure that he's done it.
And then, let me know if I forgot, hopefully. Okay, so once that's done, what you do need to do is log into that container registry from the command line here. So I already did it in AZ login, so I'm already logged in to Azure through the command line. And then what you do is an AZ ACR for Azure Container Registry, login, dash name and the name of your container registry, which is my container registry. That's what my container apps. That's what I called it. So then I'm logged in, and then what I'll have the ability to push using Docker push my containers up to that container registry. Login succeeded. So now that I've created this, I need to create a tag of that image that I had created and run previously, this monster weather dash image. So I'm going to do that here. I'm going to do Docker tag, and the source is monster weather dash image. And I'm going to push that up to my container image, my container apps, that Azure Container Registry. So my container apps.azure.cr.io. That's just the server name here. And then I have to tell it the name of what I want to give it. So I'm going to put it in a test folder, and I'm going to call it weather, monster weather, and give it a tag of version 1.1.0 or 1.0.0. So I've created the tag, and then I'm going to do Docker push and give it that same name. Really having issues with my copying and pasting in the terminal here.
Just losing a little bit on the end of that copy and pasting.
Let's just see if that went there. I do have some other ones. It did it?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think it managed to push because it couldn't find the image locally. So if you go back up, you're just missing the tail end of that. Then you'll need like the tag, the version tag too, I think.
Oh, it did it on a separate line. That's
it did.
Issue with zooming in for you, my dear viewers.
Ooh, that is also not right.
No, what is going on?
Now you've pasted too many tabs.
Can't even copy paste right, Simon. What's going on? Okay, this time it's actually pushing.
It's all right. You can always stop and open a bakery instead.
That's true. That's true. It's always the backup plan. Okay. I don't know why I did an ls there, but if I come in here, I should see my monster weather.
Indeed you do. Look at that.
With that 1.0.0 tag. Good stuff. Okay, we did all the things that we needed to do just to get a container app or a container image published somewhere so that we can do something with it. Let's actually go and explore Azure Container Apps now. So I'm going to the docs show how to do this through this command line, which is great, and I'll probably be exploring that some more on my own. But I thought I'd go through the actual portal here and do it that way. So creating container apps. This is in preview. It's very early days for this service still. But I'm going to create that, and I'm going to put it in the resource group container apps test, and I'm going to give it a name. So I'll call it monster weather app. And so once you're in here, this was a little bit confusing to me at first. I'm creating a container app, but I have to put it in an environment. So what is an environment exactly? Good question. So with it, there's these constructs that you'll need to be familiar with in Azure Container Apps. There's the environment, which is kind of that isolation boundary. It's a collection of container apps. And within the environment, those apps can talk to each other. They're like deployed within a virtual network is the way that works. And they can easily talk to each other. It's kind of that level of isolation for your set of container apps. So it might be like a group of microservices that make up your application.
So that might be like the production version of my payroll application, which has 6 or 7 microservices in it.
Yeah, exactly. So those services would be containers within the environment. And then within the containers, you have revisions. So revisions being basically different versions that you might be working with of a specific service. And then with those services, with those revisions, you have the ability to like route traffic to different instances of it.
Excellent.
Okay. So I need to go and create an environment because I don't have an environment yet. So we'll call this monster weather dev. Now, this is oddly only available in 2 regions,
Hmm.
North Europe and Canada Central.
I really like both of those regions, so
Yeah.
I'm okay with this. Oh, and you can attach it to a log analytics workspace.
Yes, so it needs a log analytics workspace because that's how you will be able to monitor these things. And that's something we'll dig into a bit more, but I'm just going to create a new one here called Monster Weather App, also in Canada Central. Okay, so I create my environment. Next, we can review app settings. It defaults to using this quick start image, and then you can't really change any of these other settings, but we'll explore it a bit more once we...
If you uncheck that
Actually,
quick
you can
start image,
uncheck
what's it
that
do?
and
Okay.
yeah. But I'm going to leave it as the default one, and then we'll kind of look at how to change it once it's deployed.
Okay.
But I could actually decide here right now which one to deploy. But we'll start with that. Review and create. We'll create that. These are fairly quick to deploy based on the last time I tried it. So we'll see if that's still true now while we're recording.
In Murphy's Law, it's very unlikely.
Mm-hmm. You're right. It's usually not how these things go. You might have noticed when I was toggling through those settings, you don't have to use Azure Container Registry. You could have your images hosted on another container registry external from Azure as well. You could use like Docker's Container Registry, or there's ways of getting integrated with GitHub as well. Almost there. Notice that it says Cube environment.
Makes me suspicious that maybe there is some sort of Kubernetes under the covers here.
Yeah.
Which is great, because then we've got the power of Kubernetes behind the scenes here, but it feels like we're really reducing the complexity here.
I think that's really the idea. Almost there. Now the container apps being deployed.
So I wonder if this as a technology is built on top of like Azure Kubernetes and then container instances. It feels like probably what it is.
I don't know if container instances plays into it. I'm not sure. It'd be
I,
interesting to
I would think
know.
so, because otherwise you'd end up allocating like entire virtual machines, and
Right.
either that is exceedingly well covered up or like not something that we're doing here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that looks like it deployed. Let's have a look. We have our environment and our app. So let's go to the app. The app has a URL here. It has a bunch of kind of made up stuff to it. The Monster Weather app, and then this green water, some hash, and then the Canada Central region that we deployed to. But here's welcome to Azure Container Apps. So that's that welcome container that got deployed. Let's go have a look at what it takes to deploy a new revision that uses our container image that we had published to the registry. So to do that, I go to my container app here, go to revision management, and here you can see there's that that one image, or that one revision that's deployed, that is that welcome image. If I click on that, I can go to specifically that revision. So if I click on this URL, you can kind of see the difference there. So you have this additional name at the end of it that tells you to go specifically to that revision within the container app.
That is actually a very nice feature, because that gives you the ability to say to your QA department, like, hey, here's the revision that you should be testing.
Exactly.
So you could have this thing deployed in a way that like your entire QA environment is in this, but it has multiple different branches deployed to it. And if you're only changing one component at a time, then you can still have like 99 components that use the standard components, and then that one that you're changing, you want QA to look at.
Exactly. So let's see what that would look like if we're using that type of scenario. So I'm creating a new revision, creating and deploying a new revision here. I'm going to give it the suffix of ACR test, and I'm going to point this to my Azure Container Registry now. Oh, actually, I have to re-enter that for some reason. But here's my registry. I'm going to pick that weather app one that we just published. I'm going to pick that 1.0.0 image tag and leave all the rest of this the same.
Oh, and you can override the command there too. That's fun. So
You
if you
can,
need to
yeah.
deploy something that has like an extra flag that enables debug or something, you can do that.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I will delete the one that was in there.
It's interesting that the new one that you created has 0.5 gigabytes of memory, and the old one had 0.5.
0.5.
Yeah.
And then we can adjust the scale here. So this is some of the power of the auto scaling and the fact that this is serverless. I can actually have it set to 0. So if it's not in use, I'm not going to build anything at all. And then I can have it auto scale. It's supposed to go up to 25, but for some reason the slider only goes to 10 replicas. And then you can set up all these different rules for when it's going to auto scale. So based on like number of concurrent HTTP requests coming in, or you can do it based on actually don't know what these custom rules are, but available with it from the command line, you have the ability to create these rules based on like CPU load and like the typical things you would expect to be able to do that.
Do you want to have at
with.
least one instance, or is that?
Yes, I do actually. Good point. So I'm going to go to one instance. And this also integrates with Dapper, which I don't really know a whole lot about. I've never used it before, but I'm curious to kind of see how this works. You can enable Dapper and give it some Dapper config, and that I think is for like coordinating how your different containers talk to each other within that environment. But that's kind of interesting and something I'm anxious to get my hands on as I start to understand this a little better. Okay, so it's deploying my revision. I can hit refresh here. One thing I don't like about the default there is that it automatically started sending 100% of my traffic over to that instance.
So if you go right
That new
now,
revision.
what happens if you go to the URL? Oh, it's too late. It's gone
It's
too
too late
quickly.
now. But let's just go back to kind of that scenario we were talking about where maybe we just want our QA to go and test this new thing first. So if I hit save now, 100% of my traffic should still keep going to that original one, which would be the welcome to container apps, or that welcome image, right? But we could point our QA over to this URL and say, hey, go and test this new version of the app that we're deploying.
I like the other version better. It's prettier.
It is prettier, but this one has weather forecasts, so in both Celsius and freedom units. And then once you're happy with that, I mean, you can do all kinds of fun things with this, but you could, oh, I went too far back. Vision, I could, split 50-50. I can activate, deactivate different versions, or maybe I'm just happy with it and I can send 100% of my traffic to the new one. Just change to that config. Zoom out a bit. That's updated, and now I should be able to actually come in and I think I can delete these older bit. Oh, I have to make them inactive, and then I can delete them. But let's check. Okay, so that's the revision that I just made inactive. This is my live one that's going to the new revision that we deployed, and I should now believe be able to delete this one. No, maybe not. I thought there was a delete here. Strange. I would have swore there was. Oh, no, it's still there. Huh.
It's just there forever. That's fine.
Yeah. I mean, it gives me the ability to go back if I ever need to, right?
Yeah. It certainly makes me feel like you have to be a little bit cognizant in how you name these so you can recognize what's what.
Yeah, that's true. So a few other things that we'll explore, I think, down the road a little bit. There's secrets. So there's a way to pass things like connection strings and other secrets over to your container apps.
So does that
Um,
integrate by any chance with like Key Vault?
I don't know. That's
I
a good question.
wonder. I wonder if it's one of those ones where you can like
Do a key vault
give
reference.
those references. Yeah.
Yeah, this is pretty early on. It's TBA. So that's a good question. I would hope so. I would hope that there's easy integration here with Key Vault because that seems like it would be an important thing. Um, but something to keep an eye on for sure. There's continuous deployment here in terms of connecting it to different container registries or with GitHub. Some things to explore there. But in terms of continuous deployment, it's all command line based here, and like it would be pretty easy to create a GitHub action workflow that automated your deployments here to different things, and even creating something like a PR environment for all of your PR builds would be,
Oh
I
yeah.
think, pretty straightforward using this approach, assuming that you don't actually route traffic to that specific instance.
Yeah, it feels like there's a lot of power here. Like it would be really cool to be able to check in some code in a PR and have a bot
Yeah,
pick that up, deploy it, and then comment on the PR like, "Hey, here's the URL you can go to test this."
I think that should be our next episode, our follow up episode here is automating some of that and looking at what that looks like.
Yeah.
And then the other thing to explore here is around the ingress. So uh, right now it's configured that TLS termination is done by the container app service. And then we talk internally to the container over port 80. You can configure that to do 443. Right now, I don't think I can go port 80 to the app. Oh, yeah, right now it's configured to do a redirect to HTTPS automatically for me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of secure by default, which is nice. But there's some other configuration here if we needed to uh, if we needed to change the way that worked. So if this was uh, this particular app was like an internal service that we didn't want um, we didn't want anybody from the internet to be able to communicate with, just other container apps within our container app environment. We could turn off the ingress here, and then I believe it would only be available to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess there's the internal, external for that, and then on or off entirely. So I suppose if it was just like a background service that was running, we could turn ingress off entirely.
Yeah, if it was something that just read from a queue and sent an email, then you
Yeah.
wouldn't need an endpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So, is there a way to do custom DNS on this too?
That's one thing that I don't see yet, which feels like it's really missing. And like is something that I wouldn't be able to use this in a real world scenario unless we had that. So that's something to look into. I don't know unless it's done at the environment level, which I haven't really looked at very much. Don't think so.
Doesn't seem like there's a whole lot there.
So I don't know if that's just a limitation of it being in preview,
Mm-hmm.
but certainly something that I feel is needed. It's possible also that it's just not exposed through the portal yet. It's something that's there, but you have to do it through the command line.
Mm-hmm.
I alluded a little bit to the monitoring piece. So everything gets dumped out to log analytics, and I need to explore a bit more in terms of specifically with like a .NET container app and how to enable more monitoring with it. I think I have some stuff that just isn't on by default there. But there is just like default console logging that gets dumped out to log analytics here. So if I query this container app console logs CL table here, I should see at least the logs from my app.
Might have to
Find
close
the
that.
run button. Anyways. So we can see here that my
Cool.
app is running and doing things. So there's some level of monitoring that's there out of the box. But I know there's other things that I need to turn on with my .NET app to enable more metrics and other things to get logged into here.
Amazing.
Early days still, as I said, but this actually feels pretty promising. I like the idea of a serverless container service like this, where the scenario that I'm kind of exploring it for myself is I've used Azure Functions in a few different places to expose like a REST type API or REST-ish API, basically just exposing a bunch of HTTP endpoints as the API for my front end app that might be written in like React or Vue. But it always feels a little bit clumsy, to be honest, doing that in Azure Functions. Whereas it seems like it would be something that would be really easy to write in ASP.NET Core, especially using minimal APIs. So maybe this is a better fit for that scenario. I feel like the code would be a lot simpler, and I like so far what I'm seeing in terms of like the deployment and management pieces around container apps. So that's kind of the area that I'm excited about this for, and I'm hopeful that it works out as well as I'm kind of picturing in my mind right now. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, I'm very excited. Cool. And we'll definitely sounds like we're going to spend a little more time visiting this over the next few weeks. So, thank you everybody for joining us on today's episode. Remember to like, comment, and share, and we'll see everybody next week.
Bye.
Bye.